let's turn it over to the audience. Who has questions? Yes!
Yes!
Oh, lots of questions. Sorry, you in front.
Sure. So both of the game designers on the panel, you're both known for creating games that have a single goal. What do you guys think the role of failure is in a game with either multiple equilibria or no equilibria at all? Like Sid Meier's Pirate or Dwarf Fortress or Mountain Blade. One where there's either no solution or any solution that you want.
Well, I think like if you look at Dwarf Fortress, well, the actual failed condition, I mean, you are going to hit it eventually, but it's actually kind of hard. Like if you make a decent fortress, it could last for a while without your intervention. But you have lots of little failures. So in that case, the failure isn't, oh, I lost. It's that your little failures have permanent repercussions. Like, oh my God, like 10 of my dwarves just died. One of them was an epic miner, and that's a loss I'm never going to get over. So you're deferring it from you died and exploded to just lots of little long-term losses.
I think it's interesting that you suggest that there's like one goal in a game like QWOP. I mean, at one level that's right. But the fact that I get emails from people proudly proclaiming that they've managed to win the game, and it's like they're at the end of the track, down on their knees, and they've shuffled so slowly that they've actually dragged the hurdle from 50 meters. And you know, the game is really like it's not the same game when you play it that way. But they've set their own goal, right? And it's taken them 1 hour and 20 minutes to get to the end of the track to go 100 meters, and they think that that's a great victory. And I don't tell them, no, you've done a terrible job, although it's tempting.
Someone should tell them.
I do. I have sometimes said, you know, have some dignity. But I actually came to think that's really important. Certain sorts of things, like having a global high score table, enforce the idea that there's one particular goal. Because you've got somebody at the top of the table who's done the fastest time or gotten the highest score, and nobody can dispute that that's now what the goal is. But if you don't have that structure, people form their own goals, and they change their own idea of what succeeding and failing is.
There's a really amazing video. So the Olympics has like a feeder program for countries that don't have like developed like sport programs, and one of them, like this guy was from Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, like a West African country, Equatorial Guinea, and he was doing the 50 meter, and there wasn't a 50 meter pool in the entire country, so he's been swimming in a hotel pool that's only 20 meters long. It's basically the first heat, he's with another guy. The other guy falls, so it's just him versus the pool. And the new goal for this guy is basically just like finishing. And I encourage everyone to watch it because like you take for granted how, you know, people doing laps, you know, people like Michael Phelps or whatever, and there's so much more victory in this guy's face. The fact that he's like, by the end, he's like doggy paddling. He's really struggling. So it's cool that you can have a sliding scale that way. Right. Next question. Right there.
What is your favorite difficult game, and who playtests your games? You want to?
Old Castlevania 3, new Dark Souls. Even though I don't think either are particularly super hard if you're somebody who plays lots of hard games, but they strike a really great balance. As for playtesters, I just had a bunch of friends on an IRC channel, and I just distributed the game freely to them. Now I have to be a little bit more selective. I'm picking people like I know from like Speed Demos Archives and stuff, people I know are really good at games. I get friends from the fighting game communities because those guys know how to break games. Really good.
Favorite hard game, again, Dark Souls, hard to go past. Old games, there's like an old freeware game by Michael O'Brien, who went on to be the head of ArenaNet, makes Guild Wars, called Pyro 2. I really encourage everybody to check it out. It's like a free ASCII game. It's just incredible building. You couldn't, incredible game, and you couldn't make it now. It's about burning down state buildings before you get burnt up yourself. But it's really, really hard. It's absolutely incredible. Playtesters, when I'm feeling really patient, I get other game developers to test my games. But most of the time, you know, there's nobody else in my house. My wife doesn't play video games. I can't get her to even look at them. And so I don't have anybody around to kind of try them out with. So when I was making Pole Riders, for example, I was playing left hand versus right hand. So that's how I do testing most of the time. And then it gets to a point where I think, well, you know, I'll just publish it. And if there are problems, the thing about publishing yourself is you just change it, right? It's not a big deal. If there was a terrible bug, people will report it. Sometimes. I had the formatting on my website messed up one time, so it was like the game, you had to scroll down like 4 screens just to be able to see the game. Nobody reported it for like, months and months. I'm like, why is my ad revenue so low? And sooner or later, somebody will report. So, I can just use people as guinea pigs, because they haven't paid anything to play my games. I don't feel bad about it. Jesper?
So for the 432 game, I couldn't, there was something moral about asking people to play Jesper, because they're asking to screw up their computers. but but it's super hard. I tried doing like a commercial casual game like a few years ago, but we ended up making it too easy, right? Because we made the typical assumption that casual players were the people who weren't sort of like, identified as hardcore players, and so we asked like people we knew who were playing video games to play it, right? And then when it came out, we sort of like obviously, right, that the people who were playing downloadable casual games were actually really into it. So they're actually super good. So I think that it's a challenging question unto itself. Right? Yeah. But I'm not afraid of say if you're testing with a fighting game community, I'm afraid of making a game that's too narrow a audience.
That's the best way to make sure, I think, that you have an audience. I'd rather make a game that speaks to a relatively narrow group, that I know they're going to enjoy it intensely, than to make a game that's kind of like, oh, it's good, by like everybody. Because, then you get a really local community, and then just their excitement over the game gets it to people who normally wouldn't. And that's not how every game should be, but that's definitely the space I feel the most comfortable with. The best way to be able to test a game is when you're making something you at least like, because there's probably somebody else who will like it too.
Right, I like both. I mean, when you make a multiplayer game and put it on a website, that's a real niche audience, because it's people who are A, on the internet, and B, have friends. And those games see a lot less traffic, but the people who play them are really much more enthusiastic. So I get a lot more people coming up to me saying that they really love the 2-player games than the 1-player games.
That's a good point. It's kind of like the couture approach to game design. That's like your runway show, whatever. Hardcore, crazy. Next question. Let's see, who else we got?
So your games are called abusive because they are really difficult to master, but games that are actually abusive, games that where the only challenge is endurance, like Jamie Thompson's Marathon, where you got to play 26.2 miles track and field style all the time, or Desert Bus, right, where you're playing for 8 straight hours to get a single point. I'm curious to know what you think of games like those that are actually abuse, that are easy to play. There's no challenge whatsoever except just sitting and doing.
I did one like that. I mean, in QWOP for the iPhone, there is a 50-kilometer race walk mode. So you have to go 50 kilometers without ever having both your feet off the ground at the same time, or you get fouled out. And I did that because my favorite moment ever in the history of sports was at the Sydney Olympics in the 50-kilometer walk. This Australian walkist, the women's walk, was in the head of the pack coming into the stadium. She's done 49.6 kilometers. She's just to do one lap of the stadium and she'll have the gold medal. And as she comes down the ramp and she's just coming out to be seen by the screaming fans who are going crazy, she wasn't expected to win, they flag her down and they give her a foul and she's out. And she breaks down in tears. And it was like, again, with sport, like with games, it's about making it matter. And the fact that she's there, she's crying, she's devastated, her last 4 years are up in smoke. That's beautiful. That adds meaning and drama to something that's otherwise, at risk of being a waste of time. So
Bennett likes watching people's dreams vanish.
I thought I was the monster.
And that's what's great about Desert Bus as well, as you can screw it up after you've been playing for 24 hours. You could mess it up, right? But Desert Bus should be more abusive. Like it should suddenly get hard after you've been playing for 24 hours.
I think it does, right? Like, well, that's a problem, right? Because the bus actually lists to one side,
Right.
So you can't just like pull down.
But this is the cool thing about Jesper is that you're denying even that joy of getting better.
Right.
Is that the thing? So the only reason to play is to show off that you're playing it.
Right. Look, I think one of the things about art is you're trying to provoke emotion. And that's how art goes from being something that people just walk past and kind of don't look at to being something people really respond to. It's meant to provoke some sort of emotion.
Let's we'll take 2 more questions and we're going to end it. We'll do it right there at the end.
This is for anyone. I was wondering if you guys make a distinction between games that are more sort of like mentally challenging versus physically challenging, and you could do the players make a distinction between that. I mean, sort of like, well, like this is a puzzle that I can't figure out, or I know what I need to do to get past this level, I just can't get the time right.
I would say players definitely feel a distinction, but what sort of skill test a player is more apt to tolerate varies a lot from person to person. I am very good at like execution challenges. I have very good hands. I enjoy, like if there's something I can't do, I enjoy learning. And I know other people who hate that. And I kind of get more, I get annoyed at abstract puzzles a lot. So it all depends, and there's no real good like heuristic for that. It's just one of those things where if you're making a game, you might want to be consistent on like, you know, what amount of each you use on your ratios, so you don't betray somebody. Like, oh, I like this on some of the hard puzzle. Unless you're making a game like One Hearts, and then you do whatever you want.
Michael Rowley is very good.
No, but I think there's something interesting about like puzzles versus like thinking puzzles versus executing puzzles, right? Because I think puzzles tend to play with this idea of impossibility, right? That I think a lot of good puzzles are really about that you can sit down and look at the problem, you can logically explain why it's impossible. You also have this idea like the designer, you trust the designer well enough to know that there's something very obvious that you're overlooking. So I think that's very interesting about puzzles, is like playing with them. I think there's an old one from cartoon when he jokes about making like impossible riddles for people who are on speed.
For me, my favorite puzzles are actually ones that make me feel like I'm having to flex a mental muscle that I don't usually, that's out of shape, that I don't usually use. And I can sort of, it's like it takes effort, of the same kind of willpower effort to be able to go through it. And I don't like puzzles where I feel like, you know, my problem with Sudoku, for example, is once you've worked out the method, it's still mentally taxing, but not in a kind of an interesting way where you feel like you're flexing that muscle. You just know there's like a mental process you have to go through. I'm not so interested in that. But I think that when you take the puzzles that do feel like they're kind of taxing in the right way, there is a kind of a continuum between that and things that are actually physically taxing. We made a version of GIRP where you have to play it using, it's projected on a wall, and you have to play it using 4 Dance Dance Revolution pads. And it's incredible because you know, it looks easy to kind of crouch and press buttons on the floor, but when you're actually doing it, these are muscles you never use, and you get really, really tired really, really quickly. And it's still like a gaming challenge for me. It still works.
One last question, and then we gotta go. We'll do it in the back because he's sweating.
There was a question about Megaga. I played it recently in San Francisco, and I saw there was a real prize on the stage. I saw a guy get a high score, but I didn't stay to the end of the party, so I was just wondering if he actually won that, or did a bird come in?
So I should say we had this big golden box with a ribbon and a mystery prize inside, but you had to get to the top of the cliff to win the prize, and so you'll never know.
And on that note, thank you all very much for coming. Big round of applause for our modern panelists.